The coffee shop hummed with the usual morning rush, the scent of espresso and warm pastries thick in the air, but Camila Santos barely registered it. Her focus was entirely on the cashier, a young man whose patience was clearly wearing thin. Card declined again. Do you have another card? He repeated, his voice laced with growing impatience, pointedly ignoring the line that snaked behind Camila, each person a silent witness to her predicament. She felt the familiar heat rise in her neck, a slow burn that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with a controlled, simmering anger. At 35, Camila had learned that moments like this, small public indignities, revealed more about others than they did about herself. The corporate card had, of course, been cancelled exactly 6 months ago to the day, a precise, calculated cut. But her personal account. She kept it meticulously organized, a testament to her disciplined nature. "Try this one," she said calmly, her voice betraying none of the turmoil churning within, as she handed over another card. It, too, was declined. The young man snorted, clearly annoyed, a dismissive sound that grated on her nerves. Just as the tension threatened to snap, a voice cut through the air behind her, familiar as a knife, sharp and precise. "Hey, cashier, just put her coffee on my tab." Camila turned slowly, her movements deliberate, already knowing what she would see. Daniel Kirkwood. Perfectly parted grey hair, a navy suit that cost more than some people's 3-month salary, and that condescending smile she knew so well, a smile that promised benevolence but delivered only disdain. He was the same man who, 6 months ago, had stood before the entire board of Kirkwood Industries, the company she had poured her life into, and uttered the words that had shredded her career. "Camila, sweetheart, you know we love your unique perspective here, but maybe it's time for you to seek opportunities that better align with your cultural background." The same Daniel who had invented a non-existent restructuring to fire her from the company she had helped double in size in just 4 years as director of strategy. "No, thank you," Camila replied, her voice polite, but with an underlying chill that could freeze fire. "Oh, come on, everyone's been there. It's just coffee." Daniel chuckled, a self-satisfied sound, holding his Apple Watch up to the payment reader. $5.80 won't break me." The payment was approved instantly, a swift, almost aggressive confirmation of his supposed generosity. Camila accepted the coffee with a whispered, almost imperceptible thank you, watching Daniel walk away toward the executive tables without even looking back. To him, she was just another person in need of charity, a small act of benevolence to brighten his morning, a story to tell at dinner about how generous he had been to a person in need. He had no idea who she really was, or rather, who she was swiftly and meticulously becoming. As she walked toward the exit, the mundane weight of the paper cup in her hand was overshadowed by the profound weight of the envelope in her purse. The investor signatures were there, crisp and final, along with the contracts that would change everything. 6 months of meticulous planning, secret meetings held in nondescript offices, building something Daniel Kirkwood could never even begin to imagine. She stopped at the door, her hand on the cool metal, and looked back one last time. Daniel was sitting alone at an executive table, typing furiously on his cell phone, completely oblivious to the hurricane that was about to hit his life. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known your true worth, then you know that the best revenge isn't served hot. It's served cold, calculated, and at the perfect, unsuspecting moment. 6 months earlier, Camila had walked into that same Kirkwood Industries meeting room, the very air seeming to vibrate with her anticipation. In her hands, she carried the proposal that, she believed, would not only save the company from impending bankruptcy but double its profit margin within 18 months. It was a masterpiece, 42 slides of pure strategic genius, the meticulous result of sleepless nights spent hunched over her laptop, analyzing reams of data that no one else had been able to decipher, pulling patterns from the chaos. "Gentlemen," she had said, adjusting her glasses as she connected her laptop to the projector, her voice firm, confident. "Our numbers show that we can not only survive this crisis but double our profit margin in 18 months. The silence in the room was palpable, heavy with unspoken judgment. Daniel Kirkwood sat at the head of the polished table, idly playing with a $15,000 Mont Blanc pen he had inherited from his father. Next to him were 5 other white executives, all clad in identical suits, all heirs to comfortable family fortunes, their faces mirroring Daniel's detached amusement. "Interesting perspective, Camila," Daniel had said, without even looking at the screen, his gaze fixed on his pen. "But don't you think you're, how can I put this, overestimating our ability to change? This company has traditions that go back 4 generations. Traditions. The word was a barbed wire fence he always used, a coded message that meant, "We don't want people like you making important decisions here." Camila had ignored the thinly veiled insult, focusing instead on the numbers, the irrefutable logic of her plan. For 2 hours, she presented figures, projections based on market analyses that had taken months to compile, strategies that would revolutionize not only Kirkwood but potentially the entire industry. When she finished, the applause was polite, lukewarm, barely a ripple in the stifling air. "Thank you, Camila. We'll consider your suggestions," Daniel had lied, his voice dripping with that patronizing smile she knew so well. 3 weeks later, the sting of that hollow praise turned to ice. Kirkwood Industries publicly announced a revolutionary expansion strategy, word for word Camila's meticulously crafted proposal, presented by Daniel as if it were his own creation. The company's profits tripled in 6 months. Camila didn't even get a thank you, let alone a bonus or promotion. And when she dared to question it, to point out the blatant theft of her intellectual labor, Daniel called her into his opulent office, leaning back in his Italian leather chair, a picture of relaxed power. "Look, Camila, you're very intense," he had said, as if her passion were a flaw. "Maybe it's time for you to look for something more suited to your profile. I'm sure there are NGOs that would love to have someone with your dedication." NGOs. As if she were some kind of well-intentioned volunteer, rather than the most brilliant strategic mind the company had ever had. Now, walking through the bustling streets of Manhattan, cradling the coffee Daniel had so generously paid for, Camila smiled for the first time in months. It wasn't a smile of gratitude, but one of cold, precise anticipation. The envelope in her purse contained more than investor signatures. It contained the birth certificate of Genesis Capital, a strategic consulting firm she had built in absolute secrecy over the past 6 months. 15 former Kirkwood employees had already signed contracts with her. And not just any employees. The best talent Daniel had ruthlessly fired or subtly ignored over the years for simply being different. Brilliant women, Black and Latino professionals, individuals he considered out of step with his narrow definition of company culture. Each of them harbored a quiet resentment, each possessed invaluable inside information, and each was hungry for justice. But best of all, Daniel had no idea. To him, Camila was just a problematic former employee who had understood her place and quietly disappeared into the anonymous currents of the city. What an arrogant fool. Her phone vibrated. A message from Marcus Chun, Kirkwood's former IT director, whom Daniel had fired for cultural fit issues, a euphemism, Camila knew, for being a first-generation Asian American who spoke fluent Mandarin and had too many foreign ideas. The message read, "Meeting confirmed for tomorrow. I brought a special gift, all the backups of Kirkwood's internal emails from the last 5 years, including the conversations Daniel thought he had deleted." Camila closed her eyes and took a deep, steadying breath. Daniel Kirkwood had made the classic mistake of powerful men. He had completely underestimated the woman he had humiliated. What he didn't know was that every veiled insult, every stolen opportunity, every condescending smile had been carefully catalogued in her memory. And now, every injustice would become fuel for the destruction machine she had built, with the surgical precision of someone who understood that the best revenge isn't served hot. It's served cold, calculated, and at the precise moment when your enemy feels most secure and invincible. 24 hours after Daniel's act of performative charity at the coffee shop, Camila sat at the head of a polished oval table on the 23rd floor of an inconspicuous building in the financial district. The room, sleek and modern, buzzed with a quiet energy, a stark contrast to the stifling formality of Kirkwood Industries. Around her were 15 professionals, the very essence of talent that the American corporate market had overlooked, dismissed, or actively discarded. Marcus Chun, Kirkwood's former IT director, connected his laptop to the projector, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Guys, you're going to love this." The screen lit up, not with financial spreadsheets or market analyses, but with a cascading stream of internal emails from Kirkwood Industries. These weren't just ordinary correspondences. They were conversations Daniel Kirkwood thought he had permanently deleted, including private exchanges between him and other executives about employee cultural fit. "This one's my favorite," Marcus said, clicking on a message from 2 years ago. The words appeared on the screen, cold and damning. "We need to find a subtle way to clean house. Too much diversity is affecting our traditional dynamic. Especially that Camila, too assertive for a woman in her position." A murmur of outrage rippled through the room. Patricia Morales, a former marketing director who had been reorganized out of Kirkwood after daring to question pay disparities, clenched her fists, her jaw tight. "There's more," Marcus continued, opening another file. Here, he discusses specifically how to appropriate Camila's ideas. "Her strategy is brilliant, but we can't let someone, let's say, non-traditional, take credit for saving the company. I'll present it as my own." Camila remained outwardly calm, but her eyes, usually so composed, shone with an intensity that made some of her new colleagues realize they were witnessing something much bigger than a simple business meeting. This was an unearthing, a reckoning. "This is just the appetizer," she said, her voice surprisingly level. "Marcus, show them what we found about the government contracts." The next revelation was devastating. Daniel, it turned out, had systematically lied on bids for federal contracts, inflating diversity numbers at the company by using contract and temporary employees to mask the stark reality. 92% of Kirkwood's leadership was white men from privileged families. "Federal fraud," whispered David Park, a former legal counsel who had also been quietly pushed out of Kirkwood. "That could result in jail time." "It can, and it will," Camila replied, a thin smile playing on her lips, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But first, let's play a little game." She stood up and walked to the window, watching the movement of the streets below, the bustling life of the city so far removed from the quiet storm brewing in this room. "Do you know what the dumbest mistake Daniel made yesterday?" Everyone looked at her curiously, leaning forward, eager. "He paid me for a $5.80 cup of coffee." She laughed softly, a humorless, knowing sound. "A man who stole my ideas, who made millions off my work, who fired me out of pure prejudice, thought he was being generous by paying for my coffee." Patricia shook her head in disbelief. "This man's audacity knows no bounds." "Exactly," Camila returned to the table, opening a folder of new documents. "And that audacity is precisely what will destroy him. Because while he thinks he's in control, we're here, planning how to dismantle his life piece by piece." She distributed contracts to those present. "Genesis Capital officially exists as of today. And our first client, Kirkwood Industries itself." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, genuinely confused. "I got an email this morning." Camila connected her phone to the projector. The screen displayed a message from Amanda Foster, Kirkwood's executive secretary and Camila's former colleague, who had been secretly keeping in touch for months. "Mr. Kirkwood would like to know if you know of any discreet and competent consulting firms. He mentioned that he had an inspiring conversation yesterday with a young female entrepreneur and is rethinking how the company can help emerging talent." The silence in the room was deafening. "He has no idea who I am," Camila continued, her voice heavy with irony. "To him, I'm just a struggling black person he helped out of the goodness of his heart. Now he wants to hire a company to solve the problems he created, without realizing the company is me." David Park couldn't contain his laughter. "That's genius. He's literally going to pay you to destroy him." "Even better." Camila opened another folder. "Amanda also gave me the list of clients Kirkwood has lost in the last 6 months. Coincidentally, they've all decided to outsource their strategic consulting services." Marcus understood immediately. "You're already sabotaging the company from the inside." "It's not sabotage when you offer a better service," Camila corrected with a cold smile. "It's pure capitalism." Patricia leafed through the documents, impressed. "Camila, this represents at least $40 million in lost contracts." $52 million, to be exact, Camila clarified. "And that's just the beginning." She sat back down. "Because tomorrow afternoon, Genesis Capital will present a proposal to Kirkwood Industries to solve their efficiency and modernization problems. And what's the plan? Asked David. Simple. We're going to do exactly what Daniel has always done. We're going to use his ideas against him. Camila opened her laptop and showed them a flawless presentation. For 6 months, Amanda has been feeding me all the company's internal strategies. Every plan, every decision, every move Daniel considers genius. And you're going to present them as if they were hers? Marcus asked. No, Camila shook her head. I'm going to present solutions that expose exactly how all his decisions are leading the company to bankruptcy. I'm going to prove, with irrefutable data, that he's incompetent and only got where he is through privilege and luck. Marcus leaned back in his chair, thoroughly impressed. And he's going to pay you to humiliate him publicly, in front of the entire board of directors, in front of investors, in front of the trade media he himself will invite to show how he's innovating by hiring outside consultants. Camila's phone vibrated. A message from Amanda. Meeting confirmed for tomorrow at 3 p.m. Mr. Kirkwood wants the entire board present. He said it will be a milestone in the company's history. Camila showed the message to everyone, and the smile that spread across the room was one of pure, unadulterated anticipation. A milestone indeed, she said quietly. Just not the way he thinks. While her colleagues discussed the final details of the operation, Camila looked out the window once more. Daniel was probably congratulating himself on his good deed from the day before, utterly unaware that he had just accelerated his own destruction. Because what men like Daniel Kirkwood never understood was that underestimating a brilliant black woman wasn't just prejudice, it was professional suicide. And tomorrow, in a boardroom full of people who had always doubted her potential, Camila would finally show them the true meaning of the word adequate. The question hanging in the air wasn't whether Daniel would survive what was coming. It was whether there would be anything left of his career after the storm passed. At precisely 3 p.m., Camila Santos entered the Kirkwood Industries boardroom, a sleek leather briefcase in one hand and a smile that revealed absolutely nothing of the hurricane about to descend upon that opulent space. Daniel Kirkwood sat at the head of the long, polished table, beaming with satisfaction. At his side were 12 company executives, their faces mirroring his self-congratulatory air, and, crucially, 3 business journalists whom he had personally invited to document his innovation in corporate management. Everyone, Daniel announced, his chest puffed out, radiating an almost unbearable smugness. I'd like to introduce Camila Santos, CEO of Genesis Capital. A talented young entrepreneur whom I had the pleasure of meeting yesterday, and who will help us revolutionize our operational efficiency. Camila nodded politely, a subtle dip of her head, and connected her laptop to the projector. Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here to solve Kirkwood Industries' problems. Solve problems. Daniel laughed, a short, dismissive burst of air. Well, maybe that's a strong word. Let's say, optimize. No, Daniel, Camila interjected, her voice cutting through his, firm and unyielding. Solve problems. She clicked on the first slide. The room, filled with the scent of expensive coffee and fresh ambition, suddenly felt colder. Because after analyzing your internal data, I can say with absolute certainty that this company is less than 6 months away from total bankruptcy. Daniel's smile froze, a grotesque mask of shock. Some executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, a low murmur starting to spread. Let's start with the basics, Camila continued, her voice calm and professional, completely unperturbed by the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. In the last 18 months, Kirkwood has lost $52 million in contracts that were considered guaranteed. Would anyone here be able to explain why? Total silence. No one dared to meet her gaze, let alone offer an explanation. No. Then let me clarify. She clicked to the next slide, which showed an audio recording icon. This is a recorded conversation between Mr. Kirkwood and a potential client, 4 months ago. Daniel's voice, unmistakably arrogant and dismissive, echoed through the speakers. Look, between us, we know that our team doesn't have the same diversity as other companies, but that means we have less drama and more focus on the job at hand. Daniel paled, a sickly shade of white. "How did you get this recording?" he stammered, his voice laced with panic. "Oh, Daniel," Camila smiled, a cold, predatory baring of teeth. "Did you really think you could fire 15 talented people without any of them keeping evidence of the real reasons?" Her gaze swept over the stunned faces of the executives. "Next question. Does anyone here know why major corporate clients cancelled contracts in the same week?" One of the journalists, a young woman with a sharp gaze, began taking furious notes, her pen scratching against paper. Camila clicked again. The screen showed a series of internal emails, the prejudiced messages Marcus Chun had recovered. "We need to find a subtle way to clean up the department. Too much diversity is affecting our traditional dynamics," she read aloud, her voice devoid of emotion, simply stating the facts. "This email was sent by Mr. Kirkwood to the entire board 2 years ago. That's been taken out of context," Daniel shouted, jumping up from his chair, his composure completely shattered. "Has it?" Camila remained unperturbed, a statue of quiet defiance. "Then let's look at the full context." What followed was a devastating 20-minute presentation. Discriminatory emails, crystal-clear recordings of meetings where Daniel made overtly racist and sexist comments, forged documents used to defraud government contracts, and, perhaps most humiliating of all, irrefutable proof that he had systematically stolen ideas from employees he later fired. "And here we come to the crux of the matter," Camila said, displaying on screen the strategic proposal she had meticulously created 2 years earlier. This strategy that saved the company and earned Mr. Kirkwood a $5 million bonus was created entirely by an employee he fired 3 weeks later for cultural fit issues. Daniel was visibly sweating now, beads of perspiration forming on his temples. He slumped back into his chair, a defeated man. Who are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Camila finally allowed herself a full smile, one that carried the weight of 2 years of humiliation, 6 months of meticulous planning, and the sweet, intoxicating taste of justice finally being served. "I'm Camila Santos, former director of strategy at this company. The same person you fired for being too assertive for a woman in her position. The same person you bought coffee for yesterday, thinking you were doing charity work." The silence in the room was deafening. Daniel leaned on the table, his legs clearly shaking, his face ashen. "But the most interesting part of our story," Camila continued, her voice chillingly calm, "is that in the last 6 months, 15 talented former employees you fired out of prejudice have started their own companies. And do you know who their main clients are?" She clicked on the final slide, an impressive list of companies and contracts, now belonging to the network of professionals Daniel had discarded. "The total value of the business that has migrated to our network. $120 million annually. Nearly 3 times Kirkwood's current revenue." One of the journalists, her hand trembling slightly as she scribbled notes, raised her hand. "Ms. Santos, what does this mean for the future of Kirkwood Industries?" Camila looked directly at Daniel, who had collapsed in his chair, his face white as a sheet, stripped bare of all his former arrogance. "It means that arrogance has a price, and that price is total irrelevance." She calmly closed her laptop. "Genesis Capital has no interest in saving Kirkwood. Our goal today was simply to show you the consequences of building an empire based on prejudice and incompetence disguised as tradition." Daniel tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. You planned all this." "I did," Camila said, picking up her briefcase. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room, a powerful, undeniable force. "Every humiliation you put me through, every opportunity you stole, every condescending smile was carefully catalogued and turned into fuel for this moment." The executives looked at each other, clearly realizing that they were witnessing not only the end of a company, but the complete, public destruction of a man who had confused privilege with competence for far too long. "Oh, and Daniel," Camila stopped at the door, her hand on the handle. "Thanks for the coffee yesterday. It was the most expensive $5.80 of your life." As she left, the sound of cell phones ringing simultaneously echoed through the room. Investors, clients, and partners who had watched the live broadcast, courtesy of one of the journalists present, were already cancelling contracts and withdrawing financial contributions. Daniel Kirkwood, the man who had built an empire on the talent of others, now watched that same empire crumble in real time. And it all started with a simple act of charity, paying for a woman's coffee whom he should never have underestimated. But one question remained, a silent echo in the now chaotic boardroom. Would Daniel be able to pick himself up from this devastating fall, or had his arrogance dug a hole too deep for any chance at redemption? What would happen to a man accustomed to power when he discovered he had lost absolutely everything because of $5.80? Julian Thorne stared at the city light sprawling beneath him, a glittering tapestry woven from the threads of his own relentless ambition. From this penthouse eyrie, $200 million of meticulously engineered influence, of data algorithms that whispered the secrets of millions, felt less like an achievement and more like a suffocating blanket. He'd built Kronos Innovations not just from scratch, but from a void, a gnawing emptiness left by a childhood steeped in the bitter taste of helplessness. He'd craved order, a world where the capricious whims of fate could be predicted, mitigated, controlled. And for years, his empire had been the ultimate instrument of that control. He remembered the early days, the feverish nights spent coding, the evangelistic fervor with which he pitched Kronos's predictive analytics as the panacea for societal ills, crime reduction, resource allocation, even democratic integrity. He genuinely believed it, or perhaps, he desperately needed to. The initial successes were intoxicating, each new contract, each soaring stock price, a validation of his vision. He was lauded, a titan of industry, a benevolent technocrat ushering in a new age of efficiency. But the quiet hum of the servers, the constant flow of personal data, had begun to morph, subtly at first, from a tool for good into an omnipresent eye. The psychological toll had been gradual, insidious. He'd dismissed the first dissenting whispers from his conscience as the petty anxieties of lesser men. When Dr. Aries Thorne, his own uncle and the company's former head of ethics, had confronted him about the potential for algorithmic bias, for the erosion of privacy, Julian had seen it as an attack on his creation, on him. He'd rationalized, he'd explained away, he'd even manipulated. For the greater good, he'd chanted internally, a mantra against the rising tide of doubt. He'd tightened his grip, centralizing power, isolating himself further behind a bulwark of wealth and influence. The faces of his colleagues, once collaborators, now seemed to hold a veiled caution, a silent judgment that he expertly ignored, focusing instead on the latest acquisition, the next quarterly report. But lately, the meticulously constructed walls of his self-deception had begun to crack. It wasn't the media scrutiny, which he could easily deflect, nor the nascent government investigations, which his formidable legal team routinely stalled. It was the silence in his sprawling, empty apartment, the hollow echoes of his own breathing. It was the fleeting images that flashed through his mind, a news report about an individual whose life was demonstrably derailed by a Kronos-generated risk assessment, an anonymous email containing a single, chilling anecdote of algorithmic injustice that mirrored Dr. Thorne's old warnings. These weren't mere data points anymore. They were human experiences, fractured and bleeding. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, pressing a hand against the cool glass. The city lights blurred, reflecting his own fragmented thoughts. He'd envisioned a legacy of justice, but what kind of justice was this? A justice dictated by lines of code, by cold probability, often without the messiness of human empathy, intent, or true context. He'd sought to remove the imperfections of human judgment, only to create a new, more pervasive form of injustice, one hidden behind layers of computational logic and corporate opacity. The $200 million empire was a gilded cage, not just for him, but for everyone caught within its invisible, digital tendrils. The man who had once believed he was building a better world now felt the crushing weight of a monster he had unleashed, a silent, all-seeing leviathan that wore his name. The justice he now craved wasn't for the world, but for himself, a desperate, nascent need to dismantle the very thing he'd spent his life constructing, to finally face the man staring back from the reflective glass and ask, "What have you done?"